and I just wish to say a few words now to introduce Ted. Ted had provided some words, I think, which were on the website, and I enjoyed having a read through those, and I'll just read through some of the words. Ted is a consulting specialist in underground engineering for transport-related projects, although he is currently involved in a pumped storage hydro project at the moment. That sounded a bit secretive, Ted, as if you weren't going to tell us what the name of that project was. Ted commenced his career on the Melbourne Underground Rail Loop, which I reckon was the late 1970s, and after gaining extensive experience overseas, moved to Sydney as design team lead of the land tunnels for the Sydney Harbour Tunnel, which I reckon might have been around 1986. I've read through a couple of Ted's papers from the Australian Tunnelling Society Conference 92, I'd say Ted 90 perhaps. So Ted has been a contributor to the Australian Tunnelling Society for many years. More recent experience includes the Sydney Airport Line soft ground tunnel, road and bus tunnels in Brisbane, and recently advice on road tunnels in Melbourne and Sydney. Ted conceived the rail tunnel under Sydney Heads as far back as '96, and he recently developed the idea in 2017 and 2018 with input from his industry colleagues Peter Prince and Dr. Sam Lackey. Can you please invite Ted to the stage? Thank you.
Thanks for that introduction. I've got about 30 slides, so I don't want to do PowerPoint to death, but hope you'll find that they're interesting slides. So, yeah, I thought of this idea in '96 and took it to statewide roads, and apparently at the time Lend-Lease and AMP were looking at a single track tunnel from Bondi Junction down to Bondi Beach, and I didn't get involved in any discussions with Lend-Lease or AMP at the time, just with statewide roads. Anyway, that got a lot of public protest about having a station at Bondi, so that project sort of just went by the wayside. So, having known that, I then looked at this particular project with the idea of lessons learned, minimising the impact on the public, both in its construction and its operation. So, as was said, Peter Prince and Sam have been very strong supporters of what I'm trying to do. So, our objective in this, and this project is not in the government's radar yet, so I could talk a little bit about politics and meeting people in transport, but maybe I'll leave that for another day. There are some politicians who are very, very supportive, and there are others that don't really get any sort of reaction from them. I don't know why, I'm not a politician. So look, our first thing is to get this thing into front of the state and federal government and get it part of their planning policy. And once that's happened, if that happens, then there'll be some momentum to do a feasibility study and then obviously a business case. So this project with the tunnel under Heads, depends, the business case is a really important part of this whole project, and part of that is developing Brookvale into a satellite CBD. So I'll talk about that a bit later. So I've published 2 articles already. So in November 2017, I went to a tunnel boring machine conference in China, in Wuhan, and that was very interesting. There's about 70 speakers over about 2 days, and lots of case studies of Chinese tunnelling. And then there's a few of us from overseas giving talks on our projects. So that you can download that from ResearchGate. And the other one, published in October 2018, was in the Australian Tunnelling Journal. So you may or may not have seen that, but you can go to the ATS website and download that, or go to the Tunnelling Journal website. So if you look at Sydney, the Greater Sydney Commission report really doesn't go beyond Pittwater. So somehow Gosford and Wollongong sort of, I don't know, they don't exist in Sydney for some reason, but they do. So there's lots of people working in Gosford travelling down to Sydney, and they're even working in Brookvale. So there's a lot of population north of Sydney, and it's growing, and obviously with expensive housing and land. With the North Connects tunnel, when that's open, that's a 10-kilometre long tunnel under Pennant Hills Road. I can envisage that a lot more people will be living on the Central Coast and travelling on the road tunnel, good, better traffic conditions into Sydney. And with that increased population, there'll be also people trying to use the Gosford to Sydney rail line. And I'm sure it's already a very slow rail line. And with additional traffic, passenger traffic, it'll be more inefficient. The line also has to share with freight trains coming in from the north, and the freight traffic is increasing at the rate of 5% a year. So you can imagine in 10 years' time, there'll be sort of five or more freight trains trying to get down that line. So obviously Sydney is going to have a population growth, and over the next 10, 15 years, that could be another 1 million people or so. There are different projections depending on which line you take from the Australian Bureau of Statistics, but certainly there will be more people. So in terms of the rail network, this purple line going from Bondi Junction to Brookvale is how it looks compared to the rest of the network in this schematic. The last slide I'll show you in this talk will have a near to scale map of the rail network. So this is just indicative at the moment. The important other part of this project which we envisage is if you're planning a transport network, you've got to connect transport hubs together. So the idea would be to connect Chatswood with Brookvale with a light rail connection. Now this is all obviously in the future. Now if we're looking at Brookvale being a footprint potentially 3 times bigger than North Sydney, you're looking at Brookvale being a big city. Okay, so that's what we're not talking about a few townhouses. So this transport is for envisaging that kind of growth. So this is just an outline, or the first pass at an alignment. The yellow line is the light rail. So 80% of the light rail would be underground. So we wouldn't be trying to compete with road traffic, both during construction and during operation. I happen to live in French's Forest, so I'm very aware of what's happening in that area with the widening of Warringah Road up to 10 lanes just in that little zone under Northern Beaches Hospital, with 6 lanes of traffic coming in on either side. I also see the traffic coming up Wakehurst Parkway in the mornings. So there's going to be a lot more traffic on the Northern Beaches. The other thing which, and anecdotally, where I live, there's 6 townhouses went up where there's 1 house, and there's probably half a dozen granny flats within 200 metres of my house that are in the process of completion. So they're just been built in the last 6 months, 12 months or so, and they're just being completed now. So if you repeat that all over the North Shore, the North Shore is getting denser by stealth, even without proper planning. So the other interesting thing which I really didn't know about, and anecdotally, I know the Western Sydney's hot, warmer than the coastline. But I did go to this WASROC launch, this Turn Down the Heat, just before Christmas. So I suggest you go to their website and download the information. This is an extract. So there are 7 councils out in Western Sydney that are concerned about development and how urban development will increase the temperatures already out west. So there's a lot of work has been done in terms of what sort of materials these buildings should be built from, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, at the conference, or the launch, we all hopped on a bus and drove around this estate, and the houses had 150 square metres of land per house, and the debate there was, and I was just listening, these mayors of the council and planners and saying, oh, you know, we can't put any trees around these houses. That's the first thing, for shade. And strategically, they're thinking even of building shelters for people to go to when it's hot. So I didn't say that, I just heard it. So there you are. So things are happening out there which, unless you just put your feet on the ground and have a walk around and listen, you just don't know exists. So a lot of people there will go to a shopping centre to get cool in the hot day. And also when we were there, they were talking about these houses maybe having 4 or 5 cars per house, because people were living out there and then having to travel every which way all over Sydney to work. Okay, back to this project. I've highlighted there just the area we're concentrating on the small box on the left, your left. And the area we're talking about today is the orange area just from Sydney to Gosford. But in the long term, this project could be part of the first stage of a faster rail link between Newcastle and Canberra. But obviously that's very, very long term. That could be, in my thinking, it could be 30, 40 years away before that happens. So what we've got here is Bondi Junction, Bondi, North Bondi, Manly Vale, Brookvale, Warriewood Industrial Park. Maybe there'd be a station at DY and then a station at Gosford. So you could put lots of stations, and the paper that I originally wrote in 2017 talked about probably 3 or 4 more stations, but if you want to cut the travel time down, you've got to reduce the number of stations. So that's the idea here. So if you're trying to service people in the Central Coast that they can really cut their travel time down, there's no point in having 10 or 15 or whatever stations coming into the city. The other advantage of having Brookvale as a satellite CBD is that people on the Central Coast can work in Brookvale. That can be their CBD, or Gosford can be a more developed regional CBD. I would envisage with a really efficient rail line that actually people on the North Shore might want to work in Gosford. So it creates a whole lot of more opportunities. Obviously people on either side of the harbour can get across more efficiently than they currently do. Obviously everyone down at North Bondi or Manly, apart from the ferry, has to travel up to the harbour bridge before they can go anywhere else on the south or north shore. So I guess I illustrate this point. There are a lot of crossings of the harbour. We've got multitude of crossings at the harbour bridge with the harbour tunnel, the road tunnel, the metro, the new metro, stage 2, and perhaps the Western Harbour crossing. It still leaves this great big gap of 7.5 kilometres, which means that our transport system will always be inefficient. You know what happens when there's gridlock on the harbour bridge? The whole city sort of stops. There's no real safe, there's no necessarily redundancy in the system. And that's certainly, looking at the Western Harbour crossing and where it's coming out at Warringah Expressway, is definitely my concern. So if we're going to tunnel under the Sydney Heads, I was very fortunate in 1996 that I was a consultant then to Statewide Roads, and Coffees at the time were doing the site investigation work for the North Side Storage Tunnel, and they had a boat out at Manly, and just as a freebie they ran across the heads and did this survey across the head. So that's the only information I know that exists. So I thank them for that. And the other interesting thing on the geology of this area is you might think it's remote or difficult, perhaps, but there's been a lot of tunnelling done in this area. So we've got the ocean outfalls at Bondi, we've got North Head, and we've got the North Side Storage Tunnel. So the North Side Storage Tunnel was an open TBM, no segmental lining, and went under paleo channels, 90 metres depth, similar to what we're talking about going under Sydney Heads. If we were going under Sydney Heads today, we would be using, perhaps depending on the depth, but we'd be using a segmental line tunnelling for a start. Now, obviously in the softer material, we'd be using a slurry or EPB machine. And the advantage, though, of going deeper, because we're not going to have stations in this scheme near the shoreline, so we can go deep and do quite rapid tunnelling on both sides of the harbour, probably obviously more cautious under the harbour itself. So it makes the project very efficient if you don't have to stop and change over to specialised TBMs. We will have to do that anyway around Rose Bay, but and maybe up Narrabeen Lakes. But the idea is to have the alignment where we can back from the shoreline, and the stations back from the shoreline as well. And that's part of this thing about people on the North Shore being very sensitive about overdevelopment or the impact of transport on the normal suburban block that we have in Sydney, or particularly on the North Shore. So the idea would be to build this railway and have it operating, and people living in freshwater, etc., just wouldn't even know it existed. Okay? So that's the sort of thing we're looking at. In relation to experience that we're going to be getting in the next, well, you actually saw that the TBM was delivered to Sydney to cross the harbour earlier this week. So it's a 7-metre diameter TBM slurry. So that's got about 90 metres of soft material to cut through. And obviously 15 metres head of water, where in our particular project, if it goes ahead, we're looking at 25 metres head of water, plus whatever head of water there is, depending on the depth of the tunnel. We also have Cross River Rail in Brisbane. We've got projects in Melbourne. There's crossing the Yarra River. We've got the Perth Tunnel in soft saturated sand. So there's a lot of experience coming together all around Australia, and the timing is probably pretty right. So I'd imagine that this sort of project, if it was going to get up, might maybe in the next 2 years, maybe some design might start. And then after Sydney Metro Stage 2 is completed, the tunnels, and we'll all be looking for something else to do in Sydney that's challenging. So maybe this project in 2025 might start, you never know. I mentioned we start from Bondi Junction. So the existing station at Bondi fortuitously has a crossover on both sides of the station. The second crossover went in 2005. So that means you can still operate trains into the station while maybe you cause some disruption inside these stub tunnels. That's where you'd start off your new tunnel for access. And then harking back to Brookvale, I just want to sort of give you an idea of the footprint and its relative location to the shoreline. So I think it's a great place for a city. If you know Brookvale at all, it's pretty, in my opinion, pretty ripe for redevelopment. And that's not to say it's going to happen in the next couple of years, but there needs to be planning done. So with the Northern Beaches Road Tunnel, if that goes ahead, and knowing Pittwater Road, It is not going to help Pittwater Road at all. So what will happen if Northern Beaches goes ahead? I think that people will see their traffic congestion really rise quite rapidly, and we'll be looking for alternatives. So that's hopefully, that's where we'll get some legs on this project. So already at DY is getting very highly developed. So this is the photo taken when I was down there in June last year. So there's 5 tower cranes, and I've been told by other people in the know there's another at least half a dozen towers planned. So a lot of the areas that are pretty run down now in Bondi, the retail areas, are all going to be demolished and rebuilt, probably, I don't know when, but not in the distant future, that's for sure. Okay, this is just a schematic overview. So a lot of this I've sort of explained, but what just going through the little boxes here, we're looking at doubling the rail capacity to the north by taking passenger traffic off the existing freight line. There are currently 40 long-distance passenger trains and up to 20 freight trains in each direction per day. So when I was working on North Strathfield, which is on the northern line, there were actually 360 train movements per day. It's a lot of traffic. Now, the idea of using the Bondi Junction and the Illawarra line is that once we get to the CBD, we can use existing stations. It's Martin Place, Town Hall, Central. Obviously, it's something like $400 to $600 million to build a railway station in the city, in the CBD. So there's a capital gain cost by using existing facilities. So when we look at Brookvale, this is an area, a satellite view, and just envisaging, I've just put on there the footprint of Chatswood and the footprint of North Sydney. So you can see the size, relative size of these CBDs relative to the potential of Brookvale. And we have spoken to a couple of planners. Now, the advantage of Brookvale is, in terms of it bursting into life into a new city, is that it already has major retail facility there, so Warringah Mall. So that's a great catalyst to then develop a city itself. And the other issue, getting back to traffic, this is just an idea that you put Pittwater Road perhaps into a cut and cover tunnel, and then you could move across that whole area of Brookvale seamlessly. So if you know North Sydney or Chatswood, they're both a bit inhibited by the through traffic on the Pacific Highway. So the idea would be to eliminate that sort of traffic hassle so that people feel as though there's no barrier dividing the city itself. So what I didn't mention though, which I want to emphasise, is that this could be a mixed-use facility. So it's not just, it could be something better than Chatswood, something better than North Sydney. So to have your high-rise, your commercial, etc. Then you could have a university. There's no new universities on the North Shore. You could have a technology park. Now, Brookvale is a major employer of light industry. So what I'd be looking at there is to accommodate them, and perhaps other areas of the northern beaches, is a high-density light industrial park. So I mentioned travel time, and that's what this slide is about. So we can easily, with just standard rolling stock, with a reduced number of stations and a direct line from Gosford, you could easily get into the CBD in under an hour. And with a higher speed rail line, perhaps even up to 160 kilometres an hour from Gosford, you could reduce that even further. So this could be a staged project. It doesn't have to, you don't have to go, oh, we're going to go high speed rail. It could be that you just extend the existing Illawarra line. That's just another 5 or 6 railway stations. It's just an extension. You just use the same technology and run it out to Gosford. Or you could upgrade the whole line to current metro standard with driverless trains. Or way in the future, you could try, the justification would be to connect Newcastle and Canberra using a very fast train service. So this slide's a little bit about population growth. Currently, the population predictions for Sydney have been an underestimate. So I expect that in the next 10 years, that probably will be the same. The idea is to provide these more dense but well-serviced areas of development rather than this sort of densification spread across the whole of the suburb of the Northern Beaches. We've been to Waverley Council and had discussion with them, and obviously you know what the traffic's like in Bondi. Bondi Junction, everyone parks on the streets. So the biggest problem for that council is parking. So we looked at, but they don't want more high rise. So the idea, for example, at North Bondi would be to have a very large underground car park, just to satisfy that particular problem or help solve that problem. I mentioned in the introduction that people on Bondi didn't want a train. Well, that sort of philosophy there is, well, if we get lots of protests from people in Bondi not wanting improved public transport in the form of a train line, then we won't build the station. So maybe we should do a reverse thing. We say we're never going to put a station at North Bondi and then wait for the protests for people to want one. Reverse psychology. So we looked at putting a station at Manly, but thought for sensitivity reasons, and really Manly's already got ferries, and Manly Vale is much more suitable because it's on Pittwater Road. So you have a traffic interchange on Pittwater Road for buses, etc. So these stations are areas that other forms of transport feed in commuters or passengers. Then we get to Brookvale, and if Brookvale ever became this big city, and we've only got limited stop stations on this particular line, then I could even see in the future another tunnel under Sydney Harbour servicing Brookvale with more stops. I won't go through all the things on there, but you get the idea. So some of the advantages that we see is new coastal cities and housing affordability. And when I'm talking about coastal cities, I'm talking about the living environment, but also the earlier thing regarding Western Sydney being very hot, and in my opinion, not necessarily a very pleasant place to put 1 million people. We've got a lot of potential north and south of Sydney for further development on the coastline. So new world-class commercial centres, Brookvale, Gosford, perhaps even with a Northern Beaches University. Much faster rail, definitely less dependence on the Sydney Harbour Bridge. If you run the Illawarra line right through south up to Gosford, you're probably servicing about 2 million people. It doubles the capacity on the freight rail growth to 250. It's traffic congestion busting everywhere. Martin Place Station interchange is enhanced because you're getting more passengers coming into Martin Place who then can transfer to Sydney Metro 2. Because obviously at the moment it just stops at Bondi Junction. It's not pulling in people from the North Shore. And around the stations, there'd be significant opportunities for private investment. Okay, so that's the sort of option one, which is just from the CBD, Bondi Junction, Gosford, and then ultimately maybe that could be expanded out to Canberra and Newcastle. But there is another option where we would rearrange the tunnels under the CBD. We would run through Martin Place Station to the west, and the Town Hall Eastern Suburbs line would swing around and go under St James Station. I've got diagrams for this. And you would then connect Parramatta directly to Bondi Junction, and then from Bondi Junction to Brookvale, etc. So Sydney would be crossed. You imagine the CBD of Sydney would have a north-south rail link from Chatswood down to the airport, and then it would go north-south, and then there'd be a east-west link from Bondi Junction through to Parramatta, and then from Parramatta out to Sydney, Western Sydney Airport. So this is Bradfield's original SketchUp, and the link between St James Station and Town Hall was never built, apart from about the area I haven't shaded going north. So those tunnels exist, which I've been down and inspected, and tunnels south under Hyde Park. So this is now 2019, and when these were constructed in the 1920s, obviously the high-rise buildings weren't there that they are today. So if we're going to link St James Station to Town Hall, because the Eastern Suburbs line, those platforms were built, but then that got morphed into the Eastern Suburbs line. So we'd take that over. We would tunnel under the Metro, stage 2, and then we'd put the station under the St James Station box. So we wouldn't actually use the old railway tunnels, we'd tunnel underneath them. The old railway tunnels would become pedestrian links between, for example, St James Station and Martin Place Station, which is then got a new pedestrian link to the new Martin Place Station as part of Sydney Metro 2. That's just the line going out to Parramatta. And then if we swung the yellow line round under St James, it would go down to Malabar, down south. So that's the configuration. The top part of the station there is what exists at the moment. So the two central platforms have never actually ever been used since the station was built. So obviously just a pedestrian concourse. And if we were to put a cavern underneath, we would have escalators down to a new station below. So these are some historical photos and drawings of the construction of St James Station. And you can see on the top left-hand side, the sandstone is very near the surface. The excavation is only 12 metres deep. It's very shallow. So the advantage of putting a cavern underneath it is, you know, if I need to go 20 metres down, 30 metres down, 40 metres down, you've got that flexibility. You're not using old infrastructure. So you're starting out anew, afresh. And in the scheme of things, it would look something like that. So you'd have a link going out to Western Sydney Airport, through to Parramatta, to Bondi Junction, then up to Brookvale and Gosford, with the light rail connecting Chatswood and Brookvale. So that's my talk. As I mentioned at the beginning, this is a near scale, doesn't have the metro on it. But if you stand back and look at that plan, and I draw a red line north and south, there's only one railway line going to the east of the CBD. So building, being a bit controversial here, building road tunnels out to northern beaches, blah, 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 is only going to worsen the problem in the long term. Okay? All right. Any questions?
Ted, interesting talk. Thank you very much. Just wondered, have you crunched any numbers on the cost of building this and the return it's going to make in terms of the population you're predicting?
Not yet. We've made a rough figure. The tunnels would be about 8 billion, because assuming it's very easy tunnelling, and the stations would be paid for by private industry. Okay. I mean, the argument is, I mean, there's lots of ways to do costs. So I was going to show a slide about, you know, it's costing us $9 billion every year in traffic congestion costs, X billion dollars in medical expenses due to car accidents. I mean, there's so many other costs which are never taken into account in a lot of these models. Okay, and the other thing is, yeah, the more road traffic there's going to be, the longer you're going to be in traffic. You're not going to solve. You'll get onto a nice bit of freeway, but once with the increase in volume in traffic, the local roads are just going to get clogged up. And also, with a lot of these high-rise, some of them don't even provide car parking as part of the plan. So where the cars going to go that are going to use all these new roads?
Ray Wedgwood, over here, Ted.
Where?
Up here.
Okay.
Congratulations, very good presentation.
Thank you.
This is a bridge bloke talking, so...
A what?
A bridge bloke.
Okay.
Not a tunnel bloke.
Yep.
You mentioned $8 billion. What lengths of tunnel will that involve?
We're looking at 60 kilometres.
Mm-hmm. And
So this is just the tunnel part. Well, the Northwest Rail Stage 1,
Yep.
12 kilometres of tunnel was 1.2 billion.
Yep.
All right? So just sort of multiply it out. Yep.
And you showed the where you've got to go through the soft ground through the heads.
Yep.
And that soft ground was encountered on the tunnel that Alan, the one Alan did for the
Northside storage, yeah.
Yeah.
What about
he encountered that tunnel encountered a similar.
pay-urge? I know, but
Yeah,
they didn't
yeah.
use a slurry TBM. It was an open TBM, a beam machine, I think. Yeah. Yeah, open. So this wouldn't be that. Okay.
Yeah, no.
And the support, it'd be a closed face of some kind. Okay, but then it'd be a segmental lining. Whoops, put in the shell of the TBM as you advance.
And what diameter would be the tunnel?
Well, for normal metros in Sydney, it's about 7 metres excavated, okay? If that's for one TBM, for one track. But if you read the paper I've published in China, I talked about a special TBM having a double track just going under the harbour, so one TBM only, one pass through the soft material. So the problem with soft ground tunnelling probably isn't the tunnelling itself with these sophisticated machines. Just harking back to what I'm doing in Perth, that's probably the cross passages are the biggest problem.
Up here. Two things. You probably already know this, but one of the issues with the extension down to Bondi Beach was the council and the residents didn't want thousands of people coming in to have a swim at the beach, and all the residents are paying for the facilities, and that was, you know, one of the big issues. Unless you want to do something like Sydney Airport, where you add $10 on or something to get out and go for a swim at Bondi. Now, the other thing that it's very thought-provoking, this this sort of plan you've got, and you mentioned that you know, Brookvale's right for development and that, but surely Gosford is right for development, and I would have thought you'd probably put all your effort into redeveloping the whole Gosford area and turning into a combination of, say, Paris and Barcelona, where people want to live there. They don't want to come to Sydney. They might come to Sydney for their Christmas holidays or something, but you could make it so beautiful that Sydney would become a ghost town.
I don't have to answer that one. The first one is correct. It's somehow, yeah, people don't want, you know, I've got this lovely beach, I don't want anyone else sharing it. But again, if there was a huge protest, we would just say we won't put a station at Bondi, North Bondi. Just bypass the whole thing. But locals I've spoken to are fed up with the traffic congestion. There comes a point where people just don't want to be sitting in traffic. I mean, there's a two-sided thing to it, isn't there? Yeah.
You develop the business as well as the living facilities so that people don't have to come here.
Are you talking about Gosford or are you talking about
Gosford, yeah. So you instead of sort of trying to fill up Sydney and bring the people in,
I think
you develop a second major city, which could be Gosford, could be Goulburn even.
Well, maybe it should have been Newcastle.
Well, could be too, but...
So I think I'd be thinking of Newcastle being a better bet for a bigger city. It's already 500,000 people now. Why isn't it 1.5 million? And take the pressure off Sydney.
Newcastle's got a couple of beaches, but, you know, Gosford has got all the lakes. And so that, you know, you should be sort of putting the bulldozers through the whole area up there and making a livable planned city.
Yeah, we can argue this all night, but it's just, we have to do what's realistic and what is practical. Yeah?
Thanks for the talk, Ted. I was just wondering, given that you're easing traffic congestion, whether relative to the population increase, you're also decreasing the carbon footprint. I was wondering if you crunch the numbers and whether that could be a possible marketing strategy for you.
I think electric vehicles are going to come in and take over in the next 10 years, so I don't think vehicle traffic will be an issue. No, I'm not going to go down that path. No.
Just a comment there, Ted. Nigel Casey, standing up at the back. Electric vehicles are currently less than 0.5% of the registered fleet in New South Wales, and the figure actually decreased last year.
Ted, good talk, thanks. Just a quick question following Tony's earlier question. You talked a lot about private investment for the precinct, but to fund something like this, wouldn't the approach be more like value capture of the local area and then looking through what's available as government crown land and go through those areas? Maybe as a road traffic option, the B line that goes through the northern beaches as the horrendous double-decker bus line can be, you know, alleviated. You know, what's your thought on land value capture to help fund this? And
well,
then
Sam, who is not here, was in Treasury, and he is also Director of Finance in RMS. So we've talked a lot about various scenarios, and one of the problems is getting things through the Treasury government. So you might have a case where you want to fund a railway station by the people's land value has increased, so you increase their council rates within 800 metres of the station, that kind of scenario. As far as following Crown land, I think what we're really trying to do is follow areas where, like Brookvale, that can be actually developed, so it's privately owned. I mean, that's where the money is, that's where the commercial investment is going to be. Not, I mean, we want the most efficient alignment. So in my opinion, the most efficient alignment is where it's commercially sensible, where it enhances urban planning. And there's a third point. Anyway, I forgot what that was, but that's
But if you only have 4 stations all the way up to Gosford, it's going to be pretty hard to argue levy increase for that lucky 800 metres with lucky residents within 800 metres.
That's just an example.
Right.
I mean, it could be the same. If you go to Warriewood now, it's just high. It's 4- and 5-storey no, probably 3 or 4 story high flats, and with new, like really densely no land, just all these little houses, like terrace houses, all being built. So, sorry? Yeah, but that means more cars. That's what I'm saying. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I didn't say it wasn't nice.
Look, I live on the northern beaches, and there's a few people I see in the crowd live on the northern beaches. It won't happen. The minority will win this.
Sorry?
No one wants a rail link, and it's been...
Hold on. What do you mean no one wants a rail link? Yeah. That's just wrong. The thing I've got on my side is time. Traffic congestion and population growth. That's it. I mean, I don't have to stand here and beat a drum for an argument, because I know that it will happen, because buses will not cope with what, you're looking at 10 years, 20 years down the track, maybe at the worst case, but I reckon it'll happen before then. So why can't the northern beaches have trains and people out Western Sydney have trains? I mean, this is the problem with the northern beaches. I'm from Melbourne, by the way, so I couldn't give a stuff. I couldn't give a stuff about the northern beaches, even though I live there.
Yeah, look,
in terms of your argument.
Look, the argument has always been that as soon as you put a rail link there, it's going to be like a Gold Coast high-rise scenario, and that's what scares a lot of people. And all you need is that element of scare is going to cause problems. And by the way, there is a university already on the northern beaches.
Where? Which one?
At Manly.
Oh, a little one. I'm talking about something of the
one
size.
You get at Brookvale will be little too.
I'm talking the size of Macquarie University, Sydney University. I'm not talking about something down a side street.
Hey, thank you, Ted. Sorry. Yeah, thanks for the talk. I will see that some of the tunnel proposed
Sorry,
level...
I can't see. Oh, up there. I'm sorry.
Yeah, thanks for the talk. So I see some of the proposed tunnel level are quite deep, kind of minus 50 from ground level. So given in that sense, from ventilation and fire engineering perspective, will it make sense to have some emergency shaft or something like that in between Brookwell and Bondi? Because if there's something happen in the tunnel, yeah, something below 50 meters below ground level doesn't sound a good experience.
Well, the idea of having twin tunnels is you have a cross passage between them. So I was a bit flippant in saying you wouldn't have a cross passage where there's soft ground, or why you would have a single tunnel. But we have what we call an incident tunnel, which is the fire, and the non-incident tunnel is the tunnel that doesn't have the fire. So that's the reason why you have cross passages between tunnels. So it's a common. There are alpine tunnels in Europe that have cross passages, and they also have underground chambers to put people as well. So it's really not an issue. Yeah.
Thanks, Ted. Just a quick question. It's I don't know, maybe early days. Have you envisaged, looked at if there is any lost footprint, or the government have to acquire land, given the land in Bondi on these areas? I think, to my knowledge, the most expensive in Sydney, and plus adding to the cost, your approximate estimate, early estimate, 8 billion. So
for the tunnels, yeah.
Yeah.
So the problem with Brookvale is that there's a lot of individual land ownership. So maybe the government or a developer would have to buy out 20 properties to build a station. Let's say, for example. But when you consolidate the land and then sell off the development, you should get a bigger return than what you actually paid for the initial investment. I think that's what's happening with Crossrail in London, actually. The government actually underestimated the value that the profit that the developers were going to get by building around the stations.
Thank you for your talk. Just maybe a technical question. So you've referred a few times to soft ground. I just want to understand, are we talking soft ground as in like soft compressible soil, or are you saying like not rock?
Not rock.
Okay, so it's not like soft soil.
Well, it would be alluvial deposits under the harbour, so it'd be like a saturated sand. Like if you went down the beach and you stood on, go in the water, it would be like that sand, with saturated sand.
Okay, thank you.
Or it could be a very soft clay. Don't know yet.
Okay, thank you.
Ted, can you see me?
Yes. Okay. Just the lights are shining in my eyes.
That was a great talk. Paolo Giammarco.
Yep.
You mentioned the 8 billion. Is that just representative of the tunnel, or and
just
from
the
where?
Tunnel only.
And from where to where?
Yeah. Look. It's just an estimate we threw in there. We haven't done a lot of work on this. I've got a limited. We're all doing this in our own time. No one's paying us, $100,000 to get an estimator or whatever.
I know the feeling.
Yeah. But, seeing this idea came up in 1996 and I'm sort of semi-retired and I've got nothing better to do. That's not true.
Well, maybe we can get together and talk about things.
Sorry?
I've been doing a fair bit of work on the high-speed rail, and
right.
especially between Newcastle and the city. And the 8 billion is way down.
Sorry?
The 8 billion is very...
We're only talking about the gospel, not...
Okay, all right.
Yeah, we're not talking Newcastle. No.
Thank you.
I know the figures kicking around for high-speed rail, it's sort of like 40 billion.
That's a bit more like it.
Yeah.
Ted, just next to you.
Oh, sorry.
Just a general public questions. For example, if people from northern beaches does not like to have rail corridor, like what my former colleague said, and other people may not like it, if they have a big protest and they just put it on the newspaper, whatever it is, and what are you going to do?
Nothing. Because I just know eventually it'll happen, so I don't have to do anything. All I'm doing is putting the idea out there, okay? So it's a question of, if you don't put the idea out there, it'll never happen. But if the idea is out there, and as Sydney grows from 5 million to 8 million, projections for Melbourne and Sydney in 2050, respectively Melbourne 12 million, I think, or 2066, and Sydney, a smaller size in Melbourne, of 10 million, where are they all going to go?
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Ted. Thank you for the talk. So there's a bit of hope for busting the traffic. That's really good for Sydney. I want to ask, because you have proposed quite a lot of things moving the existing city tunnels.
Yes.
So do you have full support from Sydney Trains now, or is there any constraints? Because it's not that easy. You said that you just flip that tunnel to the other side.
No, nothing yet. But as I said, if we put the idea out there and people, we'll put it this way. Sydney Metro West is coming into the, if you look at anything that Transport's issued for Sydney Metro West, it goes from Parramatta or Westmead, and then there's a dot at the CBD. So where does it go? So this is an alternative to run the thing down to Bondi, even if you don't go across the harbour, just go from Parramatta, use Martin Place Station, go down to Bondi Junction, and suddenly you've got Bondi Junction connected to Parramatta. Isn't that an advantage to the city? So you forget about the harbour. It's just a stepping stone to building a better network.
I'm just wondering, like, conditions of the existing tunnels, like the disused tunnels at St. James, can it convert to a walkway, something like that? That's why I'm not sure whether Sydney Train has.
I've inspected those tunnels on behalf of a client probably 3 years ago. So the full length, either side of St. James Station. I've also inspected the tunnels at Wynyard Station, the disused tunnels going up to the Harbour Bridge as part of the removal of the toll plazas off the Harbour Bridge. So, and then I also worked on the Barangaroo South, providing a corridor under those, the towers at the south end of Barangaroo for a future rail line to go across Darling Harbour. So I'm reasonably familiar with the area, I would say. Yep.
Thank you.
Alan Henderson, Ted. A couple of things. The paleo channel that Sydney heads, I'm not sure it's quite the same as the paleo channel under Middle Harbour that we had a few problems with. We were in rock, but the rock was badly fissured and there was a direct connection to the sea, so we had to grout it all up to get through. I'm just wondering, how deep was it to solid rock in those Coffee's investigations under the harbour, under the Sydney heads? I wasn't sure what your figures showed there.
I'd have to.
Well, that's probably not that critical, but
Well, let's say it's
yeah, the bedrock
60
there.
metres.
Well, that's okay. That's not that bad. I mean,
But this, don't forget, this is just one survey
yeah.
done. You know, I mean, obviously you've got to do boreholes and.
That's right, but the rock is pretty good, I can tell you.
Yeah.
Once you get down there, you can drive tunnel through it, no problem.
Yeah, once you get into the rock, it's great.
Yeah.
It's a question of, do you want to, you know, if by not having stations high up either side of the harbour,
that's right.
you
don't
can
have
put
that-
your tunnel down deep.
Exactly.
And that's what I'm, that's
exactly.
what I'm
That's
saying.
why you could ignore the tunnel at North
Just
Bondi.
ignore the stations
The
either
stations at
side.
North Bondi.
Yeah.
Okay, the other point was just interesting, the suspending the light rail under Roseville Bridge is something that's a bit intriguing. Has the RMS had anything to say about that?
No. In fact, it's the first time publicly I've even mentioned it. But because I live in the area, it's a simple matter to go down to the park, look up at the bridge and say there's heaps of room there. There are no yachties sailing up that section like there is at the Spit.
Yeah.
So just put either put a structure across the pylons and suspend the light rail on that, or put new foundations in.
There's also a major sewer goes across there. You can put it on top of the sewer if you like.
No.
Hey Ted, thank you for that. Just a question, what's the motive behind the connection of Chatswood to Brookvale being light rail? Would a better selling point to the government be extending the metro line from Chatswood to Brookvale, and then if you go to the metro concept on the proposed?
Okay, so the light rail came out of a discussion I had with Jonathan O'Day, who's the Liberal member for Davidson. And so the first politician I met was him when Peter and I went there, and he listened to us for an hour, and then he said, oh, that's a good idea, but it doesn't go through my electorate. So I'm not interested. So I thought about that overnight, and I thought, I think I'll put a light rail through Davidson. And then I thought about the technical part of it, and I thought, that's a great idea. All right? So a lot of the discussions I've had, the one about going up to Gosford, originally we had it just going to Mona Vale. And then we had a discussion with Jason Fulinski in McKellar. He's the Liberal member there. And he knew about all the problems with people in Gosford trying to work in Brookvale. They were driving down. They were using a ferry. I don't know the exact details up at the peninsula there, but there's a huge thing about people up there objecting to people parking their cars there long term. And he said there's thousands of people in Gosford working in Brookvale because of all the factories and light industry. So he just said, oh, look, why don't you extend it up to Gosford? So then Peter and I were thinking, well, obviously that's going to make a great benefit for freight. So a lot of these ideas, we talk to non-technical people, but everyone's got something really valuable to contribute. So these things didn't just drop out. These ideas didn't drop out of the sky. They dropped out of the sky, yes, but for a reason, from us having discussions with people.
Thanks.
Hi Ted. Could you go to slide 13, please?
Sorry?
Could you go to slide 13, just to...
13?
Yeah.
Oh. How did you remember it was slide 13? 1, 3, 4,
because there's a
5,
number in the
6,
corner.
7, 8, 9, 10, 11,
Sometimes.
12, 13.
Here you go.
Okay,
Yeah,
so my wife went through these for me, and she told me to cut the numbers out, so they were looking a bit messy. But anyway, she's my proofreader.
So it's just a really short comment, but you have a paleo channel roughly at Cinemet Road by minus 60 MHD. Okay, it's not shown. Then you have a middle harbour paleo channel at minus 100 meters MHD. Surely you have a flow going towards the ocean. and therefore you already pretty much know that your paleo channel at Sydney Heads would be more than 100 meters deep. That's all. Just a quick comment to have enough flow.
I have only based that on the seismic Travis, not on any theory.
It's likely you can, yeah.
There may be theories as to why the seismic survey is not. I mean, obviously, it's not. No one would rely on something we did in 1996 for this project. Okay, yeah. It's indicative. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'll just hand back to the stage here. We'll take the last question. Just here.
Thank you again for a good talk. Putting the unwashed masses in the beaches aside, what would you foresee as the major technical dramas with getting something like this through?
Look, the thing is with the tunnel boring machines, it's very sophisticated technology. So it's not really the civil engineers that drive. There's some huge smarts in those TBMs, which are developed by electrical and mechanical engineers, not civil engineers. And there's a long history of doing, inverted commas, tunnels that maybe 30 years ago, 40 years ago were impossible. But today, I don't think there's a real drama. I mean, obviously things do go wrong. But this crossing here, on a world scale of a crossing, is not super big. It might be big for Australia, but it's not. It's not outside the bounds of what's been done before. There are mistakes made, like doing at Brookvale. I imagine the stations would be deep diaphragm walls. So there's obviously things involved in that, and piping and all sorts of things. As far as Sydney Sandstone goes, with tunnel boring machines, Northwest Rail Stage 1 apparently is $500 million under budget. So, TBMs would be a contributor. I think they're ahead of program by about 3 months. So there's a lot of experience in Sydney, and there's a lot of experience worldwide in tunnelling. So I don't see any sort of showstoppers that I'd be concerned about.
Well, it's been a pleasure listening to Ted, and thank you all for coming out. A very good turnout this evening. Ted led us through the concept that he's had for a long time, and culminating in the papers he's presented in the last couple of years. And the talk was touched on the politics and the policies, and quite a few of the questions related to those too. He touched on the technical issues and the geology. He touched on the social issues and the development of new cities, of academic facilities, of commerce and trade and industry. Overall, we touched on such a wide range of issues this evening, and I would like you all to join me now again to thank Ted very much for the effort he's put in. Yes, thank you.